I'm Dave Thomas, and this time I'm building the Estes Curvilinear model rocket kit. This runs on 13mm mini rocket motors, and it's hard to tell in the illustration here, but this has what's called a ringtail. And so it has an outer tube that goes around the inside of the fins, as well as the fins themselves. So it gives it a kind of a special look. And if we look in the instructions here, let's go through the checklist, make sure we have everything. All right, we've got the nose cone, body tube, fin stock. This is the outer ring that will become the ringtail. And then we have a small parts bag, and this contains the parachute, the centering rings, the motor mount, shock cord, and then here we have the engine hook, the launch lug, the hook sleeve, and the thrust ring. And then finally, kind of tucked away behind everything else, we have the decal sheet. Okay, so it looks like my model kit is complete. And we will start clearing this away and get right into the build. According to the instructions, our first task is to assemble a motor mount. However, I'm going to jump ahead for just a moment here and talk about the fins. So if you're not going to do any treatment to the fins like sanding sealer or anything like that, you can just do this in this order and not worry about it. Personally, I'm going to add some sanding sealer to my fins, and what this will do is fill in a lot of the wood grain, and so when I go to paint this, it will look smoother. You don't have to do it, and if you just want to get right into building the model, that's fine. All right, what I'm going to do here is take some fine sandpaper, and I've got this sanding tee. A sanding block also works well. If you don't have any of them, just use your hand. But having a flat surface on the sandpaper gives you a more even finish. Okay, and then use a hobby knife to cut out each fin. These are mostly laser cut, it looks like. There'll be just a little bit of a tab on each side, just cut through that, and then this should fall out nicely. Okay, and there should be that little gap right there. That's where the ringtail is going to fit in. And then just do the same here for the other fins. Okay, the remainder of the fin stock here either can be discarded, or if you keep a box of old balsa, I do myself, just put that wherever you want to keep it. Okay, I tend not to throw anything else away that is possibly usable for another rocket someday. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take all of the fins and stack them together. Okay, and the first thing I'm going to do is just take another piece of sandpaper. This one's a little bit used, but I use it for the same thing here. And now as a stack, I'm just going to take the root edges here all together and just drag those across the sandpaper a few times. Okay, the root edge is where we're going to glue it to the rocket, and so this should be nice and square, no rounding at all. Okay, and then for the other edges, I'm going to start out the same way, not as hard perhaps, but just to remove that sooty layer there. And just go ahead and go around the corner on this part. And then on the trailing edge, be careful here that you don't snap off these pieces. So make sure you give them some support with your finger as you do this. Okay, so now those are all sanded, and the kit recommends that we round off the leading edges here. They recommend rounding off this edge too. That's a little more optional. Okay, and then the kit leaves the trailing edge square, although you could round or taper that as you prefer as well. And like many things in model rocketry, there's a trade-off here. So if you round the leading edge and taper the trailing edge, it's going to give you a really nice airfoil. What it's also going to do, though, is weaken the fin. And so I tend to just round the leading edge only. That gives me a fairly decent improvement in aerodynamics without weakening the fin substantially. Sanding sealer is drying, we can move on to the motor mount, which was the actual first step here. So in the small parts bag we have our centering rings, our motor mount, the engine hook sleeve, thrust ring, and finally the engine hook itself. The other stuff can go back. So the first thing is we'll go ahead and cut out the centering rings here, and all we have to do is just cut through the little tabs. There we go. Alright, and then we'll take our ruler and make some measurements here. So I'm going to go ahead and mark this as the aft end. So we're at the rear of the rocket. And we need a measurement at 6 millimeters or 1/4 inch. Right there, and another one at 13 millimeters or 1/2 inch, and then finally at 3.8 centimeters or 1.5 inches. Alright, and so for the first thing we'll do here is our far mark up here at 3.8 centimeters. I'm going to put a slot right next to that. So I'm just going to cut a little slot about 3 millimeters or 1/8 of an inch, and then take the engine hook and take the right angle bend part of it here, and I'm just going to pop that in just like that. Okay. And now we need to put the engine block in, so that's going to go in this end. And for this I'm just going to use a little bit of wood glue. You can also use white glue for this. And we don't want a whole lot because we don't want to force a lot of glue down inside there. So I'm just going to put a little bit around the rim here, and then that will get forced downward. Here's our engine block or thrust ring. I'm just going to slide that in until it meets up with the engine hook in there. Okay. And then we need to put the sleeve on. So this is going to go over the end and then down to that point. And here I'm going to go ahead and just add some more glue to that. So I'm going to spread some glue above or forward of where that's going to be. And it doesn't make any difference. If you get glue on the metal, it won't hurt anything there. Okay, I'm going to slide that sleeve down until we get to the mark. Oop, come back here. Alright, and don't try to do this in one motion here, or the glue tends to grab, as you see. I'm going to just leave it there. Okay, and just wipe off the excess glue. Alright, and then our centering rings here, the one without the notch will go right up here, right at the end. The one with the notch will go on the aft end and up to that mark. Alright, now that's not wanting to go on, and it may just be because of these little tabs that are left, so I'm just going to slice those off. And we'll try this again. Here we go. Alright, so now I'm going to back those off just a bit. And here I'm going to add some more glue. And in this case, I don't want to get glue on the retainer clip there, so it can still move. Okay, and I'll just scoot that until I can see the mark. Right there. And just make sure that's even all the way around. And then for the forward ring, I'm going to back it down a little bit. And then do the same thing here. We'll just put some glue all the way around it. And then we'll just scoot that into the glue. And I'm going to leave just a millimeter or two there. And kind of smooth that in. Okay, now I'm going to let this dry before we get ready to put it into the body tube. While the glue on the motor mount is drying, we can go ahead and cut out the fin marking guide. And if you don't want to destroy your instructions, you can make a photocopy of this. You just take your hobby knife or a pair of scissors and cut this out. take the body tube and get a piece of tape ready. Don't need a lot. Alright, now I'm just going to wrap the guide around the aft end of the body tube and simply align these marks. Okay, once we have them aligned, we'll add some tape here. And then I'm going to go around and just make a tick mark on each side at each line here. So all the F's stand for fins, the LL is for the launch lug, and I'm going to write that on here, so just a little LL. Okay, and then using either a door frame or a marking guide, go ahead and extend the lines. I'm going to use this tube marking guide that Estes makes specifically for doing this. Okay, you just find the particular guide that fits your tube. Okay, and I'm just going to take and connect my lines here. Looks like their line marking guide might be a little bit off. Let's try this one. This one's better. All right. In my launch lug line, I'm going to run all the way up the length of the tube. I can always erase it later. Okay. Now our fins are still drying, and so we don't want to put them on quite yet. Something I do like to do here is take a little bit of fine sandpaper, or even medium, this is 100 grit, and I'm just going to sand where the fins are going to go, right along the line here. And that's just going to make a rough spot that will be better for the glue to hold on to. And you don't have to do this very hard. If you do happen to erase your line, you can go ahead and draw it back in. Okay, I'm also going to check to see where the launch lug is going to go. Okay, that's going to be at 3.8 centimeters or 1.5 inches from the base. So my launch lug I'm a scientist, I always like to use metric whenever possible. Alright, so there's 3.8. So the launch lug will go just forward of that, so I'm going to go ahead and sand it a little bit there too. Now, further on in the instructions, it suggests that if you're going to paint the ring tail here, the actual ring itself, a different color than the rest of the rocket, that you should do that early on. Okay, so don't wait till after the rocket's assembled, do it now, and then we'll assemble it painted. So we'll put the fins on, do the rest of the rocket, paint the rest of the rocket, paint this, and then assemble the ring onto the fins. So I'm going to take this off camera and figure out what color I'm going to paint it and go ahead and do that. My motor mount is dry enough to handle now, And so first I'm just going to give it a quick dry fitting here. Make sure everything's going to go through properly. It's hanging up just a little bit there. So I'm just going to take a better grip there. Take some sandpaper here and just take a little bit of the cardboard down here. And it's probably just those little nubbins left over from the cutting process again. Alright. There we go. Okay, so I'm actually doing this before the fins. The instructions show it putting the motor mount in afterward. I'm going to do it early, as I'm always afraid that if something gets a little bit stuck and suddenly gives, that I might break a fin. So I prefer to put the motor mount in first. And I also like to align it with the launch lug line here so that the clip is out of the way. When this is on the stand, it'll be standing with the clip next to the launch rod, and that keeps everything out of the way of the igniter clips and things like that. Alright, so I'm going to pull this back, and now I'm using a stick or an applicator. It says to put this about 2 inches up. Okay, and that's for the glue, so I'm just going to measure 2 inches. Alright, I know I've slipped out of metric there, but that's okay. Alright, and I'm just going to get some glue on here. I don't want too much. We don't want big globs of glue inside because they'll start soaking into the cardboard. Okay, and I'm going to recheck my distance here. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this in, not touch anything until my thumbnail hits here, and then I'll come up against the side and just spread this around. Okay, so that gives me a ring of glue in there, and when this goes in, it's going to go all the way up till the motor mount is flush with the body tube. But here, before I slide it all the way in, I'm going to take my applicator once more, and I'll put a ring of glue right inside here so that there's something for the aft centering ring to actually be attached to. Alright, now I can slide the whole thing in, and I find my launch lug line again. And I can feel the glue grabbing already. You need to be careful of that. Okay, and then we're just going to slide that in. And I'm going to take my ruler here and just pop that down. Okay, now I'm going to make sure that the cardboard is all even here. Okay, that looks good. Okay, now you can see some air gaps there around the ring, and we can fix that with a little more glue. So here we can just kind of make an interior fillet with our glue. Alright, and I'm just going to let that completely dry for a good hour or so. The sanding sealer on my fins has dried, and I'm only going to use a single coat here just for demonstration purposes. So I'm going to go ahead and remove the pins and sand these down. Now if you decide you want more than one application of the sanding sealer, that's fine. You can either do this step with the pins in, or you can put the pins back in later. So here I'm just going to take some fine sandpaper, and I suggest using 150 to 220 grit for this. Okay, and just sand that surface. Now I'll warn you that the sanding sealer tends to start to pill and roll up underneath this, so you just need to periodically clean that out. And what I'll do here is first sand both surfaces. And again, be careful of this fin part here, as it's going to be fragile. Okay. Now the idea here is that the sealer is filling in the grooves of the grain, and anything left on the surface gets sanded off. And so this is why, if you want a really smooth surface, you want multiple coats of sanding sealer and periods of sanding in between. Right, now here I'm getting the leading edge once more, making sure it's rounded, but also it had sanding sealer on it as well. And then we also want to just briefly catch the other edges here, and especially the root edge. We really don't want sanding sealer on that, so if you've got some on there, just sand it off. Okay. And so I'm going to continue this with the other 3 fins off camera and then come back. Now that the fins are prepared, we're ready to glue them on. And so here you're going to want some wood glue or some white glue. And here I'm just going to put a very thin layer on my fin here and just smooth that in. Okay, we really don't want a heavy layer of glue at this point because it makes it take longer to dry. Okay, and so now I'm going to take one of my fin lines, and first I'm just going to put this on briefly and then take it off again, and I'm going to wait 30 to 60 seconds here and allow the glue on both sides now to become tackier. And this is something that'll help keep the fin from moving once we do put it back on here. So it'll stick right away and will dry fairly quickly. We'll strengthen the fins later on by adding fillets along each edge. Alright, so let's go ahead and put this back on. And again, we need to be careful of the groove or the slit here cut in the fin, because it's going to try and bend on us here. Alright, now I'm going to look down and make sure that my fin is perpendicular and also straight with the rest of that fin line. And this is why I extended this fin line so far, is it gives me something to sidle on. Okay, let this sit still for about 10 minutes and then repeat the process with the other 3 fins. Now that the fins are dry, we can put on the launch lug in the same manner. And so we'd already made a mark here. That's where the aft end of the launch lug will go. And so here we'll go ahead and add a little bit more glue. Okay, now this time we really don't need to wait for it to become tacky, since there's not a lot of tension on it. We'll just glue it right on there. Okay, and then move it until we are completely in line with our launch lug line, and we can just go straight through there. Look at it from the top. Okay, that looks good. And so I will set this aside to dry once more. Our next task is to mount the shock cord. And here it's right next to where our fin alignment guide was. And again, if you don't want to cut up your instructions, simply make a photocopy of this. same time, we will also prep the nose cone. Alright, so our nose cone here often has a little piece of flash within the eyelet, and we'll just carefully cut that out. If it's providing a lot of resistance, don't try and cut it all at once, just do it in a few layers. Be very careful that you don't cut the eyelet of the nose cone itself or your fingers. There we go. Alright, and then if you got little bits of flash there, just go ahead and trim those off. Okay. Now, depending on how much detail you want here, as you can see, my nose cone here has a groove on each side, and this is from the molding process. And depending on how much time you want to spend on this, you can ignore this completely, or you can sand this down, or you can sand it down and then add some filler putty to it to fill in any spots that are low. So I am going to do the last of those choices, and the first thing I want to do is find some sandpaper here. Alright, so for this I'm going to use some 220 grit sandpaper. And first I'm just going to knock down any higher ridges here. Okay, I'm going to do this on both sides. Alright, and then anything else got a little bit of flash up here on the top, just sand that off. Okay, and then I'm going to lightly sand the entire nose cone here. This will give a better surface to which the paint can stick. And this doesn't have to be really lengthy or really deep. I'm just going to go all the way around here. Now again, if you don't want to go through all this work and you just want to put the rocket together quickly, you can skip this step entirely. Alright, the last thing I'm going to do is apply some plastic model putty. And this comes in a few different brands. Mine's Testers, it's just you can't see it anymore. Alright, and what we're going to do here is I'm just going to run a bead of this right along that seam. And there's a little low spot there. Okay, and then you just take a finger and smooth that in. Okay, and then I'm going to do the same thing on the opposite side. Okay, now I'm going to put this aside to dry for at least an hour before I resand it. In the meantime, we can go ahead and mount our shock cord. So here's our shock cord, and I'll just kind of lay this out. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to lay this on the mount across parts 2 and 3, and I'm doing it at a bit of an angle, because when this folds up, this part of the rubber is going to come over this part. And if I can get them to lay beside each other rather than on top of each other, it's going to save some space in there. So once again, we're going to use some wood glue or white glue. And here we actually want quite a bit of glue in this. because the idea here is to get this to be all kind of one laminate. So it becomes one thing all together. Alright, so once we've got our glue on there, I'm going to take section 1 and fold it over into section 2. Okay, now you can see some glue oozing out of there. I'll be able to clean that up here in just a moment. But this is something you want to make sure you do on a surface that you don't mind getting glue on. Okay, and I'm going to fold section 2 over section 3. Okay, and I'm going to squish all that glue around in there. And at the same time, I'm going to impart a curve to it here, because this surface will get glued to the inside of our body tube. Clean up this glue. Alright, so this needs to go down at least 1.5 inches inside this. I actually prefer to get this down as far as I possibly can, but the 1.5 inches is necessary so that the shoulder of the nose cone does not impinge upon the shock cord or the shock cord mount at all. So I'm going to apply a little bit more glue. And again, you can be fairly generous because you don't want this to come out. You don't want it leaking glue everywhere, but you want a good even coating on this. Okay, especially there where the edges come together. Okay. And now I'm just going to kind of drop this down. Okay, I'm going to stick my finger down there as far as I can get it, and I'm just going to press that against the inside of the tube. So the way I'm holding the rocket, right here is where that shock cord mount is. So make sure you got a hand behind that to support it while you really squeeze that in. Okay, so it should look like that. Okay, now with that done, I'm going to go ahead and let this dry some more. And I'm not going to tie the nose on quite yet, because I want to paint it a different color, so after I paint the rocket, I will do that. At this point, I can apply fillets to the fins and to the launch lug. And so here I'm just going to take a bead of glue and run that right along the edge of the fin there. Okay, and you can usually do this on each facing fin here. So these are 2 facing fins. Okay, and then once you've got that on, just take a finger and smooth that in. You want lots of tissues available here. All right, and then do the same thing on the other facing fin. Again, be very careful that you don't get it up into the fin slot there. Okay, now if you're using white glue, you'll need to let this dry for a good 20 minutes or so, and make sure it's horizontal, so that the glue does not run to one end or the other. With the wood glue, you can usually wait about 5 minutes and then go to the next facing side. So as this dries, I will do the other fins off camera. While my paint is drying on the body of the rocket, we can come back to the nose cone here and recall I had put some plastic modeling putty on the nose here, and now we just need to sand that down once more. I'm going to use 220 grit sandpaper. And the idea here is to sand most of this off. Now I will warn you, this modeling putty clogs up sandpaper really quickly, so you may have to go through quite a bit here. Okay, so now we have most of it knocked down. Alright, looks like I could still use some more sanding here. I can still see high areas that are higher than the base plastic. So I'll go ahead and continue. Alright, now you can see here along the area near the base of the nose cone, that's all that's left there, and that's what we want. We just want to fill in the lowest spots here. Okay, now sometimes the sandpaper can pull the putty out again, so you do want to be careful there. And depending on how smooth and perfect you want your nose cone, you may want to add another coat of putty after you've sanded this down. I'm not going to. I'm just going to use the one coat here, sand it down, and then prime and paint it. Okay, that's good enough for me. Now I'm just going to wipe this off with a dampened piece of tissue or two, or a paper towel to scale the powder off, and then I will take this off camera to prime and paint it. Here I have my paint completed on the nose and on the tail, ringtail, and on the rest of the rocket here. Now I've just slid this on just a little bit to keep it in place. Now since this has already been painted, I don't want to use glue that's going to discolor this, so I'm going to use a little bit of super glue to put this last piece on. It doesn't have a lot of stress and strain on it, so it's not like it's going to be structural here, so the super glue should be fine. And what I'm going to do here is simply go ahead and push this all the way on. Okay, and I may need to do a little straightening. Some of those fins are really tight. Okay, make sure everything's good and flush there. Okay, and now I'm just going to take some regular super glue. And I'm just going to run this kind of like a fillet, but not very thick. So I'm just going to run this along here. And just like you would do on regular fillets, just do one face at a time here. Okay, so for now, just like that. And then prop this up so that it remains horizontal. Now I'm going to let that dry for about 5 minutes, and then we'll simply rotate it 90 degrees, do the next face, wait 5 minutes, and continue all the way around. Now it's best to use very thin applications here, and then if it looks like you need more glue, add another layer. Don't try and make a big thick application here all at once. So I'm going to let this dry. I'll do the other ones off camera, and I'll come back when all of the fins are done. Okay, my fillets around the ringtail have come out quite nicely here. Now you may notice that it is glossy now instead of the flat that I had originally used. but I'm going to clear coat the entire surface with a matte clear coat when I'm all done with this, so that should not be a problem. Structurally, the last thing we need to do is connect the recovery system. Okay, so for the first part here, I'm just going to tie a double knot, 2 half hitches in the shock cord around the eyelet here in the nose cone. Okay, and I'm going to pull it one way, and then pull it the other way, and then pull it both ways. Make sure that knot is good and tight on there. And then we can lock it into place with just a little tiny spot of wood glue or white glue. And it's just like that. And I'm just going to work it into the knot a little bit. And that's all you need there. The free end here, you want to trim back to about 5 or 6 millimeters, or about 1/4 inch. And that's to help prevent that piece of the shock cord from getting in between the body tube and the shoulder of the nose cone there. So mine's pretty short already. I'm just going to go ahead and trim that off. There we go. Okay, and then the last part's the parachute, and if you've watched any of my videos before, you know that I don't like to just tie the parachute on. I prefer to use a snap swivel. If you do simply want to tie your parachute on, then just go ahead and follow the instructions that came with it. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is, here's my snap swivel. I'm going to spread out the parachute here and isolate all of the shroud line loops. So there's 1, there's 2, and there's 3. So I've got all of the loops hanging here. And I'm going to raise my camera up a bit here so I can get a wider angle. Okay, and now I'm going to hold between 2 fingers here the middle of the parachute, and then with my other finger that has all the loops on here, I'm simply going to pull this taut and then adjust things back and forth so that all of the corners there of the parachute are roughly in line. It doesn't have to be exact, and depending on how well Estes actually got the shroud lines together, may or may not be. Okay, but that's pretty close right there. Alright, so now I'm going to pinch a loop here that I had across my fingers. Alright, and the snap swivel here, I'm going to put this through the swivel end, not the releasable end here. So I'm just going to squish this down and thread that through. And the size of your snap swivel doesn't matter a whole lot as long as the snap portion is large enough to go around the eyelet of the nose cone. Alright, so during this whole process I'm keeping the shroud lines here pinched between my fingers so that their length does not change. Alright, and so then I just folded that around here like that. And just like with the shock cord, we can use a little dab of white or wood glue here to lock our knot in place. Okay, so it just takes a little bit and just work it into the knot there. And then when you're ready to attach the parachute, and don't put this into your rocket until that glue is dry, but we'll simply clip this on like that and lock it into position. Okay. So at this point, structurally, the rocket is finished. The only thing left to do is apply the decals, and that we'll do next. So to put the decals on, you're going to need a small basin of water here, and you'll need to cut each one of these out. And so this main one here with the Estes symbol and the Curvilinear, that's all going to be one big decal, and that's going to fit right along here. Okay, so it's going to pretty much take up the length of the exposed body tube. So we're going to want to trim this as close as we can. Okay. So this will fit right along here. And now I'm going to put this into the water here and let the water saturate the cardboard backing. Now you can check this once it's saturated here. Just try and move it from the edge. Okay, and it should slip freely. If it's not ready yet. Okay, we want to be very careful with this since it is so long. It will be relatively easy to break it if we use too much force and it's not quite ready to come off yet. Okay, so that's just starting to slide, so I'm just going to slide a little bit off there. You can see the clear area. And now I'm going to put that clear bit here and press down, and now I'm using my right hand to slowly pull the backing out from underneath it. Just like that. And then we'll take a tissue here and use that to squeegee the water out and smooth out the decal. Okay, and you can refer back to the packaging to see what they recommend. Okay, so if we come back to the package, here's our main Curvilinear that we put on there. And it looks like Estes has actually increased the size of this decal since the packaging was made. And then we've got these two kind of chevron shaped ones, and those go on the nose cone here. And it's really hard to see, but there's a middle row of dots in each one of those that are white, and so when you put that on a dark surface, those will show up. And then these long rectangles, it looks like there's nothing on there. They're actually white circles on those, and those are meant to go on the ringtail. Now it's up to you whether or not you want to put all that stuff on or not. Okay. I'm going to do the rest of my decals offline, and at that I'm going to end the video here. So, have a great launch, have a safe recovery, and please stay tuned for my next video.